recording. Okay, welcome to episode 2. Welcome to episode 2 of Brick by Brick. We're sitting in my car right now so that we get good audio. I just turned the air conditioning off and it's hot as hell outside, so I just thought I'd mention that. Today we're going to be going over how to incorporate shooting practice into wall ball. It was a comment on the last Brick by Brick episode, and I thought it was a good topic for us to talk about. You don't need a net to practice shooting. It's more so how we self-audit, meaning what we're noticing about our own body as we do wall ball. If we're going to focus on shooting, we'll more so be focused on our footwork and our power generation. So a common mistake or misconception, I'll say, is that people think shooting and passing are like two different focus points. Well, of course, one, you're trying to get it to a teammate, and the other, you're trying to score a goal. But when it comes to the technique behind it, we can just encompass both of those with throwing. Throwing is both. The difference is obviously with shooting, we're going to want more power and in a lot of cases more deception. Whereas passing, maybe we stay a little more fundamental. We might want to deceive the defenders when we pass. But when it comes to throwing a ball, it's really just the same thing with some different focal points. But we don't need to, compartmentalize those too much. So that's the focus of today's podcast. We're going to be focusing on shooting within a wall ball practice. I'm using a guy stick today because I just didn't bring my girl stick with me. So when I said in the last episode that we'll always use a girl stick, I lied, and I'm sorry. But today's episode is with a guy stick. These concepts will help girls as well. We teach the same power generation concepts, the same deceptive concepts when it comes to how you can sort of distort your body. We're not really going to focus too much on deception today, but just because I have a guy stick in my hand doesn't make it not relatable for the women as well. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's get going. We're at a random elementary school. So I'm standing on a 4 square. So for the listeners, I'm going to stand right in the center. I think this will be a good reference for us so you understand what I'm trying to utilize with my footwork. So I'm standing in the very dead center of this 4 square, and there's a line that goes through that center, and it's pointing towards my target right now on the wall, which looks like a maroon baseball diamond or something like, I don't know. It's something to aim for. There's a little star on it, whatever. So I'm standing in the center. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get an athletic stance with my feet in a line on that line, pointed towards my target. So I'm a lefty. I've got my right foot in front. I've got my left foot in back. So nothing is different than what we would say for passing technique so far. I've got a set position ready to go. What I want to be cognizant of is my hip angle. So what my hips are square to right now. If I were to point both toes towards my target, my hips are now square to my target. So I can throw from this position. And that's what I'm doing now, is shifting weight from my back left foot onto my front right foot, and then pulling with my upper body / snapping my top hand wrist. All right, so all I'm doing is shifting weight onto my front foot as I release. So this is pretty, oh, frick, I lost the ball. Oh, I got one here. This is noteworthy because what I want to start to utilize when I focus on shooting with the power generation is my hip rotation. So this would be an example of a shot with 0 hip rotation. Both of my toes are pointed towards my target. So is my chest. I'll let my chest rotate back a little bit. I'm gonna have some upper body rotation, but virtually no lower body rotation. And so that's what we'll focus on at the start of this, is how to utilize our lower body rotation. All right, there's 2 components to this. One is gonna be the rotation, and 2 is going to be the transfer of weight. So weight distribution. If you just think about an athletic stance,
50% of your weight's on one foot, 50% of your weight's on your other foot. When I do this shot technique as a lefty, what I'll do is I'll start with about 70% of my weight on my left foot, leaving 30 on my right, and then I'll shift from 70% on my left to 70% on my right. And as I shift that weight onto my front foot, I'm going to simultaneously pivot. The pivot is the key for the rotation. Hey, look, there's a lacrosse player over there. I wonder what that kid's up to. He looks like he's having fun. All right, back to work here. So 2 focal points. One's with the pivot, aka the rotation. 2's with the weight distribution / transfer of weight, which is going to ultimately be my focus point when it comes to momentum. So right now, standing in position, I have 0 momentum. By transferring my weight, that will create momentum. And by doing our drill in this fashion, what we're saying, what we're prioritizing is our follow through, right? I'm not talking about some elaborate crow hop wind up. We would, like to build to that when it comes to shooting the hardest shot that we could take. Of course, we would try to focus on how we wind up into that. But if we're just going to strictly focus on shooting and we're starting, we need to make sure our follow through is dialed in first, in my opinion. All right, that's what I focus on when I teach my athletes. So from this set position, all right, what I'm going to do is again focus on that weight transfer and then pivot simultaneously. And that is how I'm generating my power. Transfer my weight, pivot. So as I transfer my weight for me onto my right foot, what happens to my back foot is very, very important and noteworthy. So for these reps right now, my back foot has less weight on it, but it's still in that same position it started. So as I transfer my weight onto my front foot, my back foot doesn't move. What I want to do is make an adjustment there. So as I transfer weight onto my front foot, instead of going 70-30, I'm going to go from 70 to about 100, aka all of my weight's on that front foot. So if all my weight's on my front foot, my back foot shouldn't be on the ground anymore. So if I transfer all that weight onto my front foot and pivot, what happens is this back foot comes around. So as I release this ball, I'm shooting off of 2 feet. That's important to note here. I don't want to step onto 1 foot and then shoot. Well, not that that's a bad thing. That would be more so focusing on a jump shot. If I'm focusing on a set shot, which we are right now, I still want to shoot off 2 feet. But after that ball is out of my stick, because I've pivoted and rotated my hips, and because I've shifted all of my weight now onto my front foot, that is when the back foot comes around, which is after the ball is out of my stick. All right, so that's our focus with the power generation, transferring our weight onto our front foot and letting that back foot follow through. Now, on top of this being huge with our power, this also has large accuracy implications. So we want to try to notice where this back foot lands in relation to the line that we originally created. So where the back foot lands in relation to the line originally created. So here I am standing on the center of this 4 square again. My feet are touching the line that looks at my target. So there's one big line that goes all the way to my target. When I transfer this weight and release this ball and pivot all at the same time, after that ball is out of my stick, I probably need to focus on the ball and try to catch it, but I also want to notice where that back foot lands. So if I were to do this fundamentally sound, sorry if the wind's picking up here, but bear with me. If I am doing this fundamentally sound, that back foot should land on that line. So I'll try to do an example here where I shift my weight and the back foot lands on that line, which in that case it looks like it did. All right, so that's something that I want to notice from rep to rep, where that back foot lands. So there's actually, in a lot of cases, you could under rotate or you could over rotate. So if I under rotate as a lefty, when I shift this weight onto my right foot, if I under rotate that left foot that now swung around, which was originally my back foot, is to the left of that line. That would be an example of an under rotation. An example of an over rotation where I maybe have too much emphasis on the rotation and less on the weight transfer. Then when I follow through, that left foot is now on the right side of that line I created earlier. So that's what I mean by noticing where our back foot lands in relation to the line that we originally created. All right, so the hip rotation, again, the pivot is what makes that happen. And the momentum is by transferring our weight from back to front foot. All right, and all that kind of happens at the same time. So there's a lot that goes into it. When we first start focusing on this, what you might notice is that I'm actually not stepping into my throw right now. All right, and the reason that I'm not, all right, that's something that I'm doing on purpose. If you watch me play or me shoot, or any like professional or high level guy shoot, of course they step into their throw, right? But in this case, right, what I'm focusing on doesn't have to do with the windup. To me, the step into your shot would be the first phase of your shot, which is your windup. The second phase is what happens as you pivot and shift your weight. And then the last phase would be the follow through. So we're basically taking phase one and just cutting it out for our focus within this practice session. All right, the less variables we can have, the easier it is to then prioritize within what we're working on, and making it a little easier to self-audit and notice one thing in particular. Now, if I feel really good about this follow-through step and I feel like I got it on this line consistently, mind if let's actually get this view of this. So we're on this line. So now we have the camera angle looking along this line at the target. So if I feel really good about getting that foot to land on the line that I originally created, all right, then I can start adding momentum into my windup. All right, so what I'll do here to keep this pretty simple, instead of taking one step with my front foot, I'm gonna shuffle. All right, and the importance of the shuffle is going to be that I do it along this line, again, reinforcing the importance of that line that we created. So I'll shuffle, and then I'm following through. So now we have all three phases: wind up, shot, and follow through. All right, I haven't really mentioned what we're working on as far as overhand, sidearm, 3/4, underhand, all right, anything like that. Right now, I'm probably doing some combination of a 3/4 and an overhand shot. That's just what I happen to be using as my sort of plan A. Most coaches want you shooting overhand. That's not what this episode's about. We can cross that bridge when we get there. But it's noteworthy because as I shoot overhand right now, what I'm really focusing on, because I'm so originally focused on this line, once I become consistent there, I can start focusing on my accuracy. All right, so I've created my power, I've created momentum. And so if I'm shooting overhand, the ball should be staying on one line for the most part. And so with that in mind, I can now focus on the height that ball hits the wall. All right, and now we're getting more into the mechanics of what my upper body's doing, because that's what ultimately controls where that ball goes. A couple different factors at play with this accuracy. One's gonna be if, in the case that we're focusing on overhand, and we actually have consistent overhand mechanics. So with that assumption in place, there's gonna be two main things that I look at with my accuracy. One is going to be the timing of my wrist snap, in particular my top hand wrist. So if my hands are behind my head when my wrist snaps, that ball's more likely to go higher, all right? If my hands are in front of my head when that wrist snaps, that ball is more likely to go lower. So I kind of actually just alluded to the second thing. So one is the wrist snap timing. Two is where my hands are when my wrist snaps. So say I have a girl's stick in my hands, which I do not right now. what I might do in order to get this ball to go to a certain spot is I might let my hands come through a little bit earlier, AKA get my wrist to snap further out in front. The reason I would do that with a girl's stick is because the pocket is smaller. So I don't need as much of a wind up on my stick. I can release this ball from more of the stick angle being closer to vertical. Whereas say I've got a stick that has a ton of whip, I might on that same focal point leave my hands back behind my body a little longer so that my wrist snaps with my hands behind. All right, and so you could use the same overall shooting mechanics and footwork and power generation and all that stuff with a girl's stick that has no pocket and a guy's stick that has way too much whip. The difference would be where my hands are when my wrist snaps. Okay, so that's going to be what ultimately controls where the ball goes, along with what we started with, the power generation, our momentum, our balance, where that follow through step lands, and all that good stuff. Okay, so this would be an example of a practice where I focused on left-handed set shooting. So if you're a righty and you want to practice your righty technique, you would just take, anytime I said left foot or right foot, you would just switch those, but it's the exact same concepts as far as the weight distribution, the rotation, the timing, the hands, all that stuff, okay? What we didn't really get into at all would be like deception concepts, and I think that makes sense because we're so focused on this line and staying on that line. That is important for what I would call just fundamental shooting technique. But at the end of the day, it's about beating a goalie and scoring a goal. So when we do progress, and again, that's not what today's about, we'll start distorting this line on purpose and stepping off the line on purpose. All right, I'll give you one simple example and then we'll wrap this up. As a lefty, instead of lining both feet on this line, I might have my left foot on the, from your perspective, right side of the line, and my right foot on the, from your perspective, left side of the line. So if I was running across the field and stepping into this position, my target is to my right, it looks like I'm more able to shoot to my left, the goalie's right. Okay, my footwork looks like I'm aiming over there. That's the line I'm creating with my feet. But by using my wrists and my upper body to sort of, what I mean by distort my body, I can snap this back to the right side, again with the intent of trying to be deceptive towards the goalie. So that would be one example of purposely distorting that line. All right, so this episode, again, strictly focused on how to incorporate shooting practice into wall ball, but ultimately, a lot of this stuff translates regardless. All right, you can change your focal points. One thing I didn't even mention was that my distance from the wall. So this whole shooting session was probably double what it was on the first episode. Let's call it 20 feet, maybe 25 at most. And the ball would bounce one time before it came back to me. All right, so yeah, that's one way you can practice shooting while playing wall ball. And let me know what you think. Peace.